check in. I'm going to say, hey, did I miss anything? Are there any other questions I should be asking? Are there any other factors I should be considering? Is there anything you want me to zoom in on? Is there anything you really want me to focus on? Here are the 4 things that I could imagine would be important for us to focus on. Which of these do you think I should focus on most? So you're really engaging them in the process as if they're a peer and y'all are figuring this problem out together. The second tip that I have is around engaging the interviewer. It's kind of related to changing your mindset, but first you have to flip the bit on your mindset to say, okay, this person's a peer, we're solving this problem together. Now that I've got the mindset that we're in this together, now I want to figure out how to actually engage them to get more information that I'll use in my simplification and synthesis process, and also engage them to make sure that if I'm missing something big, they have the opportunity to give me that, point me in a certain direction so they can get the signal that they need on the question, and also so that it's engaging for both of us. For the GCA interview, I want you to switch your mindset from this person is assessing me to this person is my peer and we are going to solve this problem together. So I'm going to ask a lot of questions. I'm going to check in. I'm going to say, hey, did I miss anything? Are there any other questions I should be asking? Are there any other factors I should be considering? Is there anything you want me to zoom in on? Is there anything you really want me to focus on? Here are the 4 things that I could imagine would be important for us to focus on. Which of these do you think I should focus on? Hello, welcome. Welcome to our weekly AMA. I think I see a couple people in. We will wait until, we'll wait until we've got a couple more folks and then we'll get started. But just as a heads up, we'll run this session the way we always run them, which is that you will pop your questions into the chat and then I will answer those questions one at a time until we run out of questions, and then we will call it a night. So I'll make sure I get to all of your questions. Hi, Par. Hi, Nell. Hello, RK Tech. So we'll make sure I get to all of your questions, but go in order. So just as we've got dog barking. So Zorro's joining us today. Come here. This is our AMA mascot, Zorro. He'll be sitting right here being adorable. So the way that we always run these AMAs is I am a big tech interview coach, job search coach, former hiring manager at Google. I have spent the last 10 years working in startups, unicorn startups mostly, taking a lot of those public, and then working at Google for 5 years. So I kind of bring the hiring manager and interviewer perspective into my coaching practice and work with people who are trying to land tech jobs. A lot of the AMA questions recently have been around tech jobs, layoffs, the job market, how things are going. So I'm happy to talk about those. And then got some great feedback a couple weeks ago, because I feel a little bit awkward, like bringing my own topics and then talking about what I want to talk about or what I'm hearing from my coaching candidates, clients. And I got feedback that people actually like when I have like an intro question. So what I've started doing now is I will wait to see if one of you has a question. Obviously, your questions matter the most to me. These AMAs are my free weekly way to give back to the Dream Job Ready community, people who follow and subscribe to Coach Erika on the YouTube channel, who follow on Twitter and LinkedIn, and like a way to like take the like flat content that I post out there that should hopefully be very helpful to you and make it more lifelike to you, answer your personal questions about your own job experience and the problems that you're facing in your job or career search. So these are for you. They're not about me. And so I want to make sure that I get to all of your questions. So I'll give it a second. And if I don't see a question come in the chat, then I'm going to talk about cover letters, which has been something that I've been getting a disproportionate amount of questions about recently. And I have strong feelings about. We've talked about it 2 lives ago, but I have some statistics that I want to share, and also some evolved perspectives. And Par, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit too. And I'm going to talk about your approach to using ChatGPT to generate draft cover letters. And actually, Par, if you've had some success with some of those cover letters, pop something in the chat to let people know. But I'm just going to take a break, take a sip of my water, and then if there's no questions, I'll talk about cover letters. And then hopefully as I'm talking about them, y'all will have some questions. All right, so we do have a question, but RK Tech, I am going to, Ooh, Par, I'm excited to talk about your cover letter. So RK Tech, your question is, I would like to know how to get hired by Apple for their data related positions. So it's very rare that I tell people that like their question is unanswerable, but I actually think that this one is. So I'm going to tell you this question as asked is not answerable. So some follow-up questions for you so that you can rework your question so it's more specific. So questions for you is like Apple, yay, no problem. I've helped many people get jobs at Apple. But when you say data related positions, there's everything from like data ingestion, data integration, data analyst roles, ML engineering, ML operations. So when you're asking about data, are you talking about data science type roles, or are you talking about analytical roles or data ingestion type roles? So if you don't mind clarifying, that will help me answer your question. But I'll just start with kind of like a little bit about Apple and interviewing at Apple, because of the FANG companies, they are definitely the most secretive, and even I have less insights. And I coach people who have successfully landed jobs at Apple, many people. And so their process is probably the most kind of like under wraps. So they don't have a kind of like consistent across the board hiring process. I have an entire video about how to get TPM jobs and PM jobs. I think I talk about Apple in there. But because Apple doesn't have like kind of like a central command and control kind of like approach to hiring, they don't have like hiring committees the way that Google and Amazon have. And so because of that, interview processes can vary team to team. But there are some things that are pretty consistent about Apple interviews that I think are worth knowing if you're thinking about interviewing at Apple. One is that Apple prefers shorter interviews. So your interviews are going to be like 30 minutes long, which is very fast when you consider that like the first 1 to 2 minutes is like someone's late. I've like never had more consistently had people be late to interviews than when I interviewed at Apple, the interviewer being late. So then you lose a few minutes there, and then like a quick intro. So then they're like, you're already at 25 minutes total, and then a few minutes at the end for questions. So it's like very, very rapid fire. So they're really short. And because they're short, that means that they like shorter answers. They prefer, like I teach the STAR++ method for answering behavioral questions. It works really well at like most top tier tech companies. At Apple, it tends to be too long for the interviewers. And so they tend to like kind of try to speed you along. So it's very rapid fire. To give you a quantified way of thinking about this, in an average Google interview, 45 minutes long, you're going to get 3 to 5 questions total. Intro, 3 to 5 questions in the middle, and then you ask questions for 3 to 5 minutes at the end. Only 3 to 5 total questions you're going to go through. In an Apple interview that's 30 minutes long, they're trying to target 7 to 9 questions and answers. So it is much faster paced, much more like they will snip you, they will interrupt if you're not moving fast enough. They are trying to get signal really quickly. And I think the third thing that's important to know about Apple interviews is that Apple has like a different hiring philosophy. Like Google and some of the other I would say Google in particular tends to hire people more for their potential. They're like really focus on GCA, really trying to understand how your brain works. They want to hear your whole thought process because they're like, we don't even know the problems we're going to have tomorrow, but we want to hire people that are capable of solving those types of problems. Apple is like, Apple and Amazon are both like this. We want you for what you can do today. What is your skill set? What are you capable of doing? What have you done? And so there's very much like a stronger focus on really talking about how your job maps to the job that you're interviewing for, your past roles map to the job that you're interviewing for, success factors in your current roles, achievements in your recent and previous experiences, because they're trying to understand if you're going to be able to come in and do this job that you're interviewing for. So that's like overview on Apple. RK Tech, I'm going to answer your follow-up question and then I'll get back to Par. I'm excited to talk about Par's thing as well. So RK Tech, I'd like to know, I'm more interested in data engineering positions. So I'm going to be really honest with you. When I don't know the answer to something, I am not going to try to answer something I don't know. So I do not know how Apple hires for data engineering. I would say in general, like if you look at any information you can find on the internet, there's not a ton about Apple interview processes. Data engineering versus like data science versus software engineering are like, I would say 3/4 of the interviews are going to be the same. And then you're going to have like 1 or 2 interviews that like really focus on, first of all, you're obviously going to be like writing code in like Python instead of, I don't even know what Apple engineers typically write in. But you're going to be writing like in a different coding language. And then your like actual project or like the actual like system design kind of like questions that you get asked are going to be more related to typical data engineering problems. But that's the best I can muster for you. I haven't had a lot of candidates who are going into data engineering roles in particular at Apple. But I would say like it's probably not dissimilar from the information you can find about the software engineering process, just knowing that you'll get questions about data engineering as opposed to software engineering. Hope that helps. If you have any follow-up questions, Architect, please feel free to ask. I definitely know a lot more about PM roles and TPM roles at Apple. All right, Par, I want to talk about this cover letter stuff. So a couple, just as a recap for people that are joining maybe for the first time. So a couple of weeks ago, we got a little goofy at the end and we were hating on cover letters. I personally hate cover letters, very open about it. I actually pulled up some data about this, and I think I had alluded to the data because I had tweeted about it, but I had forgotten the exact numbers. So I'm going to pull up that data now. So the interesting thing about cover letters is no one reads them, but if you write a cover letter, you are actually statistically more likely to get the job. And so what I think actually happens is like on the back end side, like I can see the cover letters of every candidate and I see if they wrote one or not, and I rarely read them. So I think it has this weird bias of like, oh, the person wrote something. I'm not going to actually read it, but because they wrote something, maybe that somehow biases, towards like they bias towards you in the interview process. Or it could be that by writing that cover letter, you actually did more research about the job. And so then when you're actually asked questions in the interview, you're mapping better to the job description. I talk about this in my course, First Round Ready. I talk about this quick win where you do this mapping activity where you take the role that you're applying for, put it right next to your resume, highlight the key concepts in the role, and then map it to your experience so that when you're asked questions in the interview, you're using their language, the job description language, to describe your past experience. And that those like using other people's language, like basic sales tactics, mirroring will help you get the job that you want. But here's the stats. 74% of employers do not read cover letters. 74% doesn't surprise me because I never read them. And then 53% of employers prefer candidates who submit cover letters. So it's this weird thing you have to do. But because no one's reading them, what we talked about a couple weeks ago, Par was telling us that he was using ChatGPT to generate first draft cover letters. So he in an intelligent way, not just like, hey, ChatGPT, write a cover letter for me, but like sends ChatGPT his actual resume and experience, sends ChatGPT the actual job description and says, hey, will you write a cover letter for me that has this tone or includes these factors? And he uses that as a first draft. If you are here because you are a member of the Dream Job Ready community, or even if you aren't, the link to the Dream Job Ready community, it's free, is in the description. You can join. Par wrote in the Ask Peers Intel channel, he wrote how he's using ChatGPT. And in the chat today, he says, I want to add that I got an interview because of my cover letter. And he posted it in the Dream Job Ready Discord community. So people can kind of see how he's taking those like raw outputs from ChatGPT and converting them into a cover letter that sounds more like him and has more of an authentic, genuine feel. But that probably takes less than a third of the time to write than if he was writing it himself. Because there's just so much like boilerplate stuff in a cover letter. So really cool. Interesting stats on cover letters. So basically like I get like DMs all the time. Like, do I have to write them? I'm like, yeah, unfortunately you do. Cause like 53% of employers prefer them. 74% of them don't read them, but it does actually increase your chances of landing the job. I don't think anyone's ever like teased out the exact reason it increases your chances of getting the job. But my hunch is that it forces you to read the job description and it forces you to do some like subconscious mapping to your own experience. So then you're more likely to do well in the interviews. That's my hunch. Okay. Jess, I am going to paste your question so everyone else can see it. Great question. So the question is thoughts on continuing to apply to new roles when you're in the interview process with other companies, knowing that the ones you're interviewing with now are not a done deal. So the answer is like, always hedge your bets. I'm an S&P 500 kind of girl. Like, never like put all of your like money under one mattress. Like definitely have multiple threads going at once, especially if you're unemployed. if you've been laid off and you have free time, or you're doing like some random projects here and there, but you're not fully employed and you have the bandwidth to do more interview process, it will always behoove you to do more interview process. For one, it gives you more data points to compare against in your own head, so you can feel more confident about the decision. If you do end up with multiple offers, which most of my candidates do, then it gives you that like compare and contrast. Whereas if you single source it, you just only know the one opportunity. So that's one reason to do it. And then the only reason not to do it is if you have like 3 kids, a full-time job, and like medical issues that you're dealing with, and like you just actually cannot have more than one process going at once. But it's always going to behoove you. You'll get better at interviewing as you go. It is a muscle that like gets retrained every time you go through a job search. So the more interviewing you do, the better you're going to be in your interview processes. And then of course, the more information you're gathering, so you can make the best decision if it ends up being a bake-off with multiple offers. All right, I'm going to go on to the next question now. I'm going to pop it in here so everyone can see it. So I have an SD, I think that's software developer, job interview for a biomedical devices small company. The interview was 3 hours long, 4 interviewers. Yay or nay, is this a red flag? Okay, so I'm going to ask follow-up questions just to make sure I understand. So are you saying that we have one interview with 4 people sitting across the table from you for 3 hours? So I'm going to look in the chat and see if you answer that. I don't know if there's a lag today, but if there isn't a lag, then I'll wait and see if you have an answer. So I'll start answering it, and then Nell, if you say something, then I'll know whether I was correct about this being like a 3 hours long, 4 interviewers with no prep work. So I see this all the time for like case study interviews where you've met the hiring manager, you've made it through the first round, you're going to on-sites maybe before or after on-sites. As companies are getting more, as the talent market is shifting more towards employers, they're moving up the homework. It used to be that they would only ask you to do it after a full on-site. More and more employers are asking for you to do extracurricular work before they invest more in the hiring process. And so if this is the case, that it's a case study now, I would say that doesn't feel strange to me, because in 3 hours, you're going to get and give a lot of signal. So it could be that they just have this one process and they don't have like a earlier, cheaper screening process like most companies have, like the 1 hour, 30-minute interview screening. So I'm making a lot of assumptions here. I'm assuming you've already talked to a recruiter, so you have some information about the company. I'm assuming that this is in lieu of a full on-site. So this is like they're making this huge investment and they're asking you to make a huge investment because they're going to make a decision after this 1 3-hour interview. And if those assumptions are true, I think that this isn't bad. Like, it's not more expensive than an on-site. It's definitely more expensive than a first round, 30-minute, 45-minute, one hour interview. But I think it would just really depend on whether you like the company or not, and like whether you can get some intel about them before you take the interview. And then of course, if they're asking you to do homework, then to me it makes even more sense that it's a 3-hour long thing. But if it's 3 hours long with no prompt, it feels like it could be really unstructured. So maybe some red flags there. This is not a canonical interview style for Silicon Valley, so I can't really comment beyond that. It could just be that that the company does like a demo for the first 45 minutes, and then like the last 45 minutes they let you ask questions. So it could actually just be an hour of interviewing. But that would be what I would do now. I would go back and ask the recruiter or your HR point person, whoever you're in contact with, if they can break this down a little bit more for you so you understand what to expect in those 3 hours and what, if anything, you can prepare. Okay, TPM. I like your name. No homework. Okay, cool. Okay, next question is question about a TPM leadership role. How does someone in TPM leadership role spend their day week in terms of typical priorities? I love this question because I was a TPM leader for a bit at Google. So I feel like I have all of the information to answer this question. I think TPM leadership typically is like more of a portfolio management function. So TPM leaders typically are managers of technical program managers. Technical program managers are like scattered throughout the company, usually associated with specific programs that are important to the company, or even like within engineering teams. So helping to deliver features for product roadmaps. And so what that means is the TPM leader has like more cross company visibility than the average person. A product director is going to have cross-platform visibility across their products. Engineering is in the same boat, but across just their engineering kind of domain, back-end, front-end, platform, ML, data science, whatever. But TPM leadership, if it's a central TPM team, is going to have like more portfolio level visibility. So that opens them up to spending a lot more of their time thinking about like, how are we prioritizing these projects? How are we staffing these projects? How are we thinking about the strategic goals that these projects are moving forward? Which of these projects, like, do we need to upgrade or downgrade in priority? What does that mean in terms of resourcing and staffing? What are the, how are we making sure that the ones that are really important are getting the most like resources, focus, staffing, scrutiny from like a metrics and are they on track perspective? And then how do we think about like the rest of the portfolio and how do we support the rest of the portfolio? So most TPM leaders that are kind of like working in like where they're owning a central TPM team are actually doing that like portfolio level, kind of like operational or organizational engineering type work. And then of course they manage their team as well. So they spend a lot of their time in one-on-ones. They spend a lot of their time information gathering to understand the health of the portfolio, to gather questions or answers that need to be surfaced to the rest of the leadership team, because they tend to be the only one who has this like real cross team, cross-functional view of what's going on. And then of course, identifying where there are new risks or issues that impact key programs. Hopefully that's helpful. If you have any follow-up questions around TPM leadership, I'm happy to answer them. Oh, okay. So I'm going to paste this, even though it's not a question, but Par, I like your comment here. So going back to our cover letter conversation, so Par added the fact that it does seem to help with cold applying. So writing the cover letter, like my hunch is that it helps you because it helps you actually digest the job description and speak about it in a way that's more mapped to your experience, with more articulation, with more of their words and language. But Par is saying it does seem to help with cold applying because it shows that you've done some research into the organization. And I think that's great as long as you're spending as little time as possible on cover letters. So I love this like ChatGPT hack. While ChatGPT is still free, definitely use it. And then Par also said for Nell, it seems like that 3-hour 4-person panel interview might actually be more typical for a small med device company. So there you go. Par is in that industry, so I would trust what he says there. Okay, so I think I've addressed all of the questions in the chat. So I'm going to pause for a second, drink a sip of water, and then see if there's any follow-up questions. Anyone who's been listening in who is inspired to ask a question now, please do. I'll give you guys a second and I'll take a sip of water. While we're waiting for another question, I think actually, because I recognize a lot of your names, I think most of the people that are actively asking questions right now are already part of the Dream Job Ready community. So you already know about that free resource for you. Please, if you're in the community, it's really helpful. Like even the conversation that's happening in the chat right now is great because it's sharing information to one another who are job searching. So that's the whole point of the community. I'm really excited that y'all are doing that here. So encourage you to ask more questions and then answer questions as you see them in Dream Job Ready. And if you haven't joined, use the link below and join Dream Job Ready. Lots of other ways that I can help y'all. So I have a website, coacherika.co, where you can get some job search referral tips, a Notion template that will help you with weekly reflections, all kinds of videos on YouTube. So if you're already on the channel, you probably have seen I have tons of videos about tech jobs, interviewing, job searching, comp negotiation, recruiter screens, all these things. So definitely check out the free videos. And then if you have a first round, if you're like planning to go through a job search, I highly recommend that you consider looking into First Round Ready. It is a digital course that I created to scale my impact so that I could move from one-on-one work to actually of being able to offer my coaching for a much more affordable price for people. It's like, I think it's $97 right now for an incredible amount of value that I tried to pack into a 77-minute course. It comes with a workbook to get you started immediately with some quick wins to get your like momentum built on your job search. So definitely recommend you look into that. And it looks like we do have a question, so I will jump over to that. And this is our last call and question. So anybody who's waiting to ask a question, please go ahead and stack it up. We'll consider this our last call. And then after I answer this one, if there's not one waiting, then we'll wrap it up for the night. How is overall big tech hiring looking at the moment, given there are still lots of layoffs going on? So I'm going to answer this question in two parts. I'm going to first start with big tech, and I'm going to talk about this like decaying function of bad PR. And then I'm going to talk about tech in general and where I think we're actually at in the layoff cycle to create a share, well, based on my understanding, my predictions, and what I look at in the economic data and like the momentum data that I'm seeing, and just my own intuition as a career coach. I've been doing this for 2 years, so maybe or maybe not you believe that intuition is true. So big tech. So when there are layoffs, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. When there are layoffs, tech companies do not want the following scenario to happen. Erika, long-term Googler who just got laid off, takes a photo of her badge and is like, at the end of the day, Google laid me off, at 4 a.m. and turned off my system access. But I'm ultimately eternally grateful for my time at Google, and this is why. They don't want that post, which I have 4 of a day right now, to show up right next to, I'm Erika, and I'm so excited. I'm announcing I just got a new job at Google. They do not want that to happen. Also, their internal team is a bit traumatized by the layoffs. And so there's what I call this decay curve of between PR and just operational readiness to get back on the horse and recruit and interview people. That appetite is going to be very low for somewhere between 4 and 8 weeks from the time of the announcement until they're ready to actually start kicking up recruiting. So this is true for every company. So Meta did their big layoffs back in November, I think. So they're past that curve and they're getting started again. Amazon has done a few different ones, so it's hard to figure out exactly when, but they're also a little bit less sensitive to this. And so they're pushing forward. And so I think for people that are targeting, and Apple, of course, is the only thing that hasn't had layoffs, and they just have a long history of not doing layoffs. And so they slowed down hiring, and it will still be slow for a bit, but they'll be hiring. And so then I think what you'll see is every company's on their own decay curve of the press and the emotions and internal interviewers and everyone being ready, and then they pick it back up. So I think that's what you'll see. And if you go to these companies' websites, you'll see jobs posted. And somebody asked me, are those real? Yeah, they're real jobs. But they're going to move really slowly right now. So just kind of keep in mind that decay curve and know that it's 4 to 8 weeks from the layoffs to actually kicking back up recruiting. And even then it's a slow kind of ramp back up. And then where we're at in the tech layoff cycle. So it's hard to say this because I think that, I had someone who got laid off at March or April of last year, and they very confidently told me oh, this is the end. And I was ugh, I hate to say this is just the beginning. And so I think where we're at right now is more about mid-cycle. So there will be more if you're, it's Monday, so I'm sure there's already been some this week, and there will be more. So I think we're about mid-cycle. From a volume perspective, obviously the larger companies have more tech workers in general. So when they lay off 7% of their workforce, it's a much larger number of people. So in terms of total volume, maybe we're at 240, I think 240,000 since last year. So maybe it starts to peter down a little bit. But I think in terms of companies doing layoffs, we're about mid phase there. Also, fun fact that I learned this week, there is this statistical number that most companies use. It's not statistical, actually. It's largely based on social alignment and groupthink. But most companies lay off somewhere between 6 and 8% of their workforce when they lay off. And it's this number that has been around since the 80s. And people generally use that number. So most companies, larger companies will do 6 to 8%. So fun fact, I guess. Okay, now, would you suggest engineers to try big tech still? In my opinion, it seems in my opinion, a senior engineer would be better off building their own SaaS products. Thoughts? Yeah, so there's a lot in this question that's wrapped in. A couple of things that I think are underlying the assumptions you're making in this is that the world has changed a lot. It is a lot easier to start a small SaaS business on your own than it was 10 years ago. 10 years ago, like the infrastructure wasn't there. 10 years ago, like all the tool sets weren't there. You needed to make a much larger kind of like CapEx and like engineering wise investment to start like a SaaS company. I was talking to a friend of mine who is starting an agricultural tech company, talking to him yesterday, and he's currently working out of spreadsheets, and he already has $50,000 in revenue, and he started 2 weeks ago. And so I think that what's so fascinating about where we're at in the cycle of technology is that it actually is possible for a senior engineer to build a SaaS business. I think what is hard to say is that like you're going to learn a lot building your own SaaS business because you're going to learn a lot outside of engineering. You're going to learn business model development and product and user design and investors and dealing with pitching and hiring people potentially and customer, pricing and all of these things if you build your own SaaS company. So I think for a senior engineer, to me, it really depends on what you want to be when you grow up. If you want to be a staff engineer, it probably makes more sense to go to a larger, not necessarily big tech, but to go to a larger tech organization where you have big, gnarly problems to deal with and you get to focus on engineering. If, however, you're really entrepreneurial and you really like the idea of building your own company, then why the heck not? I definitely think the barriers to entry are lower than ever for someone to solo found a reasonably sized SaaS business. And then in terms of engineers joining big tech still, I mean, there's still a lot of benefits to big tech from a brand perspective, from a kind of like, they're still some of the hardest employers to get into. So there's just like, it's like, having Stanford on your resume, it just does a lot for you in terms of lazy sourcing. But I also think that like that scale of systems is like hard to see and it's hard to build yourself in your own company. So like by working at these large tech companies, you get to see a sense of scale that you can only really imagine otherwise. So I still think there are benefits depending on what you want your career path to look like and what types of learning journeys you want to be on. So we talked about the Discord community. We talked about First Round Ready, which I highly recommend. I think some of the people that are on the call have been using First Round Ready. One of my most recent and like kind of one of my favorite success stories is someone who's part of Dream Job Ready who found me on Twitter. I just started building like a Twitter presence. That's been interesting because I had never used Twitter before about 60 days ago. And he found me on Twitter from something I posted, came to an AMA, bought First Round Ready, did the work, and then like a week and a half later, had, after 98 days, over a quarter of applying to jobs as a senior architect. So like a pretty skilled software worker. And after a week and a half of like First Round Ready, doing the workbooks, doing the work, got a job offer. So it's like really exciting to me to see people like unlocking like whatever they're doing unintentionally wrong in their job search, like unlocking that through First Round Ready. So very excited about that. Love to share his story because it's exciting. And I can't wait for more of you to have these stories. So make sure you share them in Cheers and Wins in the Dream Job Ready community so that we can cheer for you. All right. Well, I'm getting a lot of thank yous. So I guess that means we're done for the day. Happy Monday, everyone. I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Thank you for joining, and I look forward to seeing y'all again next week.